The quiz you'll be taking today is over 8.3 and 8.4. 8.3 were polynomials that had 4 terms, and that's where we went through the grouping process. 8.4 is when we had a trinomial, and you had to set up a problem that you could go through the grouping process. So we'll be doing 3 of each of those. Okay, these first 3 are going to be reviewing 8.3, which is just grouping. So we start with 4 terms like we have in this first example. And just like every other factoring we've done, we always look for a GCF first. So if you look at all 4 terms here, there's no number that multiplies to give us 40, 25, 64, and 40. So that means we can go straight to the grouping process. We'll draw our line down the middle. Then we'll take out a GCF on each side. So on the left side here, we're looking for the biggest number that multiplies to 40 and 25, which is going to be 5. And then both terms have a variable, so we can take out the smallest exponent, which is x squared. Then in parentheses, we're going to divide each of those terms by that GCF. So 40 divided by 5 leaves us with 8. We had 3 x's, we're taking 2 away, so there's only 1 x left. Then we have 25 divided by 5, which is negative 5. We had 2 x's, we're taking 2 away, so there are no x's left. So then we close our parentheses. On the other side of that line, we want the biggest number that multiplies to 64 and 40. The biggest number that gives us both of those is going to be 8. Only one term has an x, so we can't take any x's out. Then we'll divide each of those by 8. So 64 divided by 8 leaves us with 8x, and negative 40 divided by 8 leaves us with negative 5. We said our goal when we are grouping is to get those 2 parentheses to have the exact same thing in them. Okay, so we want to make sure they match numbers and signs. In this case, both of our parentheses are the exact same. So our first factor is 8x minus 5. And our second factor comes from the GCF on each side of that line. So we have 5x squared plus 8. And that's our answer. When you're going through this problem, if your 2 parentheses don't match, go back and make sure that you took out the greatest common factor and not just a common factor. For example, 64 and 40 can also be divided by 4, but that's not going to be the biggest number that we can take out of both of those. Let's try another problem. Example 2 here. Always look for a GCF first. If we look through all 4 terms, there is no number that multiplies to 6, 14, 15, and 35. So we can go straight to the grouping process. We're going to draw a line down the middle. Then we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 6 and 14, which is going to be 2. Notice they also each have a variable, so we can take out the biggest exponent, or the smallest exponent, smallest, which is going to be 2. Then we'll divide each of those terms by 2x squared. So 6 divided by 2 leaves us with 3. We had 3 x's, we're taking 2 away, so there's only 1 left. Then negative 14 divided by 2 gives us negative 7. We had 2 x's, we're taking 2 away, so there's no x's left there. On the other side, the biggest number that multiplies to 15 and 35 will be 5. Then we'll divide each of those terms by 5. So 15 divided by 5 leaves us with 3. Keep the x. And then negative 35 divided by 5 leaves us with negative 7. Again, those 2 parentheses have to match in order for us to go any further. So we've got 3x minus 7 and 3x minus 7. We're good there. So that's our first factor, 3x minus 7. And then put the GCFs that we took out on each side of that line together into the same set of parentheses, and that becomes our second factor. All right? And that is our answer. Remember that you can check your answer by foiling your 2 factors back together, so you should end up with the original problem. All right, next one. Always check for a GCF first. Okay, looking through these 4 terms, there is no number that multiplies to 2, 6, 1, and negative 3. So we're going to draw our line down the middle. We want the number that multiplies to 2 and 6, which is going to be 2. They each have a variable, so we're going to take out the smallest exponent, which would be b squared. Then in parentheses, 2 divided by 2 leaves us with 1. We had 3 b's, we're taking 2 away, so there's 1 b left. Then we have 6 divided by 2, which is negative 3. We had 2 b's, we're taking 2 away, so no b's left there. On the other side, we're looking for the biggest number that multiplies to 1 and negative 3, which is just going to be 1 in this case. So go ahead and write that 1. Then in parentheses, we're going to divide each of those by 1, which doesn't change the problem at all. So that's going to stay b minus 3. And you can write a 1 in front of that b if you want. So now for our final answer, we have to make sure those two parentheses are the exact same, which they are. So that becomes our first factor, b minus 3. Then our second factor, put those two GCFs together into one set of parentheses. So we have 2b squared plus 1. There's our answer. That's it for the grouping problems, the ones that we're just grouping on. So remember with grouping, check for your GCF. If there is no GCF, then go ahead and split that polynomial in two so that there's 2 terms on each side of your line. Take out a GCF on each side, and then put your factors together. So let's move on to 8.4 now. With 8.4, we're going to be going through the grouping process, but we have to set up that problem before we can get there. So just like with every other type of factoring, look for a GCF first. There is no number that multiplies to 5, 7, and 6. So when we have a trinomial whose leading coefficient is not 1, we're going to multiply first times last. So we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add or subtract to 7. So we have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, or 5 and 6. So looking through that list, 3 and 10 are going to be the only 2 numbers that add or subtract to 7. Okay? So now we have to set up a grouping problem. Remember that with grouping, we had 4 terms so that we could split it in half. So with our problem here, we need to set up those 4 terms. The first one's going to stay the same, so we have 5x squared. Last one will also stay the same, so we'll have a negative 6. In the middle is where it's going to change, so we're going to take that 7x and we're going to split it up into 3x and 10x. And then we need to talk about the signs for 3 and 10. So to get positive 7 from 3 and 10, we have to subtract 10 minus 3, which means the 10 is positive and the 3 is negative. Now that we have our 4 terms, we can split them in half and take out a GCF on each side. So looking at 5 and 3, the only number that multiplies to those two is going to be 1, so let's go ahead and write it. They also have an x term, so we'll take out 1x. Then if we divide each of those terms by 1x, 5 divided by 1 gives us 5. We had 2 x's, we're taking 1 away, so there's 1x left. Negative 3 divided by 1 is still negative 3. We had 1x, we're taking 1x away, so no x is left. On the other side, the biggest number that multiplies to 10 and negative 6 will be 2. So if we divide each of those by 2, 10 divided by 2 is 5, keep the x. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So just like on those last 2 problems, we need the 2 parentheses to match. So we have 5x minus 3 in both, which means our first factor is 5x minus 3. Our second factor, we're going to put those 2 GCFs together so that we have x plus 2 as our second factor. And just like with the grouping, you can FOIL that back together to make sure you get your original problem. Make sure you chose the right signs and the right numbers. Next one. Always check for that GCF first. There is no number that multiplies to 3, 17, and 10, so we'll go straight to multiplying first times last. So we want to choose two numbers that multiply to positive 30 and add or subtract to 17. So we have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, or 5 and 6. So to get 17, 2 and 15 are going to be our only options. Alright, let's set up our grouping problem. Remember, first stays the same, so we have 3v squared at the beginning. Last stays the same, so we have plus 10 at the end. In the middle, we're splitting up that 17v, so it becomes 2v and 15v. Then to get positive 17 from those two, we're going to add them, which means they're both positive. Also notice that 17 had one v, so that means each of those terms gets only one v. Okay. Alright, now that we have our four terms, we can go ahead and split them in half. Take out a GCF on each side. So the only number that multiplies to 3 and 2 is going to be 1. But notice they each have a v, so we can take out 1v. Then we'll divide by 1v. So 3 divided by 1 gives us 3. We had two v's, we're taking 1 away, so there's only 1 left. 2 divided by 1 gives us 2. We had 1v, we're taking 1v away, so there are no v's left. On the other side, the biggest number that multiplies to 15 and 10 is going to be 5. So then we'll divide each of those by 5. 15 divided by 5 gives us 3v, and then 10 divided by 5 gives us 2. Remember, our goal is to make sure that those two parentheses match. We have 3v plus 2 in both of them, so that's our first factor. Our second factor, we're going to put those two GCFs together, so 1v plus 5. You can just write v plus 5 if you'd like. You don't have to write that 1 in front. And those are our two factors. Alright, last problem. We always want to check for that GCF first. So looking at 4, 10, and 6, there is a GCF this time. So we're going to divide that out at the very beginning. Okay, so 4, 10, and 6 can all be divided by 2. So if we divide each of those by 2, we're left with 2n squared plus 5n minus 3. Now what we have left in parentheses, we're going to factor like we did on the last two problems. So we're going to multiply first times last. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add or subtract to 5. So we have 1 and 6, or we have 2 and 3. In this case, both of those numbers, or both of those pairs, can either add to 5 or they can subtract to 5. So now we've got to really think about what's going on here. They have to multiply to a negative 6. Which means we're going to have to subtract the two terms to get 5, because one of them has to be negative, one of them has to be positive. So if we look at our list again, the only pair that subtracts to 5 is 1 and 6. So that's the pair we're going to use to set up our grouping problem. So we have 2n squared at the beginning and negative 3 at the end. Then we'll have 6n and 1n in the middle. Now to get positive 5 from 6 and 1, we have to subtract 6 minus 1, which means 6 is positive and the 1 is negative. Alright, now that we have our four terms, we can split them in half. So looking at the left side, the biggest number that multiplies to 2 and 6 is going to be 2. They also have an n, so we can take out 1n. Then 2 divided by 2 is 1. We had 2 n's, we're taking 1 away, so there's only 1 left. 6 divided by 2 is 3. We had 1 n, we're taking 1 away, so there are no n's left. On the other side, the only number that multiplies to 1 and 3 is going to be 1. Now we talked about this last time. If this first number is a negative, then our GCF needs to be a negative. So then we'll divide each of those terms by negative 1. When we divide by negative 1, that leaves us with a positive 1n, and then negative 3 divided by negative 1 gives us a positive 3. Alright, we need to make sure our two parentheses match. We have n plus 3, n plus 3, so that's our first factor. And then our second factor, put those two GCFs together, so we have 2n minus 1. And there's our answer. Okay, so the only difference between these last three, we had to multiply the first number times the last, and then we set up those 4 terms after we choose our 2 factors that multiply to that number and add to the middle number. Okay, go back and watch this video. You can review problems if you need to. When the sub tells you, go ahead and put away your iPad so you can get started on the quiz. Good luck!